final topic of the night, we're going to be talking a little bit about Fortnite and how it's essentially crack cocaine.
I'm trying to do a Fortnite dance here. It really freaked my dog out.
So this is a story covered by a bunch of outlets, but I'm going to be reading from USA Today's article written by
our
Edward
favorite
C.
gaming
Bake.
outlet.
Our favorite gaming outlet. But this is part of the story, right? This is a story that reaches far beyond just gaming outlets.
Mm-hmm.
And the headline is, I do love the headline. Epic Games sued for not warning parents Fortnite is allegedly as addictive as cocaine. Which sounds like a clickhole headline, but it's not.
It does. It sounds like I'm going to click into it and there's going to be like 17 slides I've got with a sentence on each one.
But this is written by Edward C. Bake from USA Today. And essentially what has happened is that a Montreal-based law firm is representing two Quebec parents who are proposing a class action suit in Canada against Epic. They're alleging that, and I'll read from it here. They're alleging that, quote, Fortnite publisher Epic Games needs to pay the price for a third-person shooter they allege is as addictive and potentially harmful as cocaine. The two parents are parents of 10 and 15-year-old respectively. Quote, the player's brain releases the pleasure hormone dopamine, and that Fortnite was developed by psychologists, statisticians, and others over 4 years to develop the most addictive game possible. Also, Epic could reap lucrative profits.
Just wait till Epic adopts those haptic feedback features, baby. Getting that satisfying feeling in the hand.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm really dabbing.
I'm really doing it. So this is a story that, oddly enough, is actually not that unfamiliar. We've heard this before with more than just Fortnite. I was talking to I'll get into the conversation points in a little bit, but I do want to just dovetail this with a personal story. This is a story my girlfriend heard about. And this is the kind of story that a lot of people outside of gaming hear about because it confirms preconceived notions of what games and gamers are to a large extent. But this was also a story that I heard 15 years ago with World of Warcraft. This is a story I've heard with countless other games before it. And I think that's worth pointing out based on where this conversation is going to be going. This is a topic that we've talked about before. We talked about the World Health Organization's designation of gaming disorder. Luke, you sent me a great article. I do just want to quickly pull it up. A great article over at IGN written by Joseph Knoop. That the National Health Service, the United Kingdom's National Health Service, is opening its own clinic for gaming addiction. So conversations and actual real world policies around this idea are being implemented. And this is kind of just the latest example of something like this. First of all, taking this lawsuit in its specificity, do you think that this will actually go anywhere or actually do anything whatsoever?
Man, I hope not.
I talked about this on the Nightly Rundown on Monday, every weeknight on twitch.tv/PvA radio, 9 p.m. Eastern time. In putting some pieces together, yes, my first thought is with Larry, like, boy, I hope not. But between the allegations that are made here and the legitimization of gaming addiction from the World Health Organization and what I'm sure is maybe some provable conversations with correspondents from Epic if it goes to a discovery stage in talking about the mechanics and what they're hoping to accomplish with the mechanics that are in the game. I think those are like the three pieces that you need to prove in order to say like, hey, this is we have a legitimate case that Fortnite had a responsibility to let us know that this was something that that's possible. Now, I'm just a small town pizza lawyer, so I don't know all the ins and outs of the law. All right, all I know is that senators can't be impeached. That's all I know about the law.
It's a good base foundation.
Good base foundation, but from there, it does seem like a perfect storm of things coming together that could potentially lead to something. Now, should it? That's another conversation.
That's a different question, and that is a question that I want to address because I too have my questions about whether this particular lawsuit will actually do anything. It's still in its early stages, so it's kind of hard to tell. And again, we are three men who are very much not lawyers.
Much like Rudy Giuliani, I'm just a country lawyer.
Yes. But the question about where responsibility and accountability lies is a question I am interested in. And I think that this situation in particular and the broader circumstances around it sort of start to address. Larry, you've talked extensively about kind of your own experience with trying to monitor your children's behavior online and eventually with games. At least as far as I can say, and you guys can butt in at any point, please. This is an interesting situation because I do think that Epic has designed not the gameplay itself, but the apparatus around the game. So the monetization model, the kind of feedback loop of a dopamine rush and what you get out of the game. They have designed it, and not just them. Many developers have designed their games around getting you to play over and over again for extended periods of time. We're only now seeing actual action being taken by policymakers to try to regulate that. I mean, we've seen it here with loot boxes and kind of informing people, becoming more transparent about the odds of what you can find in loot boxes and the systems in place around those. So I think there's a point to be made here about how transparent these companies are about how they've designed the game. I think it doesn't really take much more than common sense to understand why they would design a game that way. But the conversation about should this lawsuit be something that ushers in a whole wave of change about how we think about games and gaming addiction is something that I'm a little bit more hesitant about, because as you've made the point, Larry, there's an aspect of this that falls to the feet of the parents as well.
There's a large aspect of this.
Large aspect.
In my estimation, at least 99%.
Yeah.
And I'll butt in there. Just there is something to be said, and I've said things in this vein about the manipulation of the feedback loop in the brain and seeking that dopamine hit. But the reality is that dopamine hit is also like, it's just an explanation of anything that makes you feel good.
Yeah, exactly.
And so like, if a game's gonna be fun, it's because it, like, on some level it's satisfying, it's making you feel good in some way. Now there are definitely like ways that companies ramp that up, and they can be predatory in it, and we should be on guard against that. But the reality is, like, even before companies were really weaponizing that feedback loop, like, the point of a game is for it to be fun and enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And I grappled with playing entirely too many video games, and it was probably addiction level. It affected my grades in college there for a bit, and that's, on this side of things, it's embarrassing and stupid, and I hate that I did it, but that was well before a lot of these things. So like, in my mind, a lot of the responsibility comes back to the individual, and that can be tough, but you got to make decisions. But in a case where it's a child, like, still under the care of an adult, like, it's almost entirely on the adult. And if you can put the time and energy into hiring a freaking lawyer and going after the gaming company, it would have been cheaper and a lot less time consuming for you to be a freaking parent and take the console away. Oh well, he just starts playing it on his phone. Then take the phone away. It's not hard.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable, but it's not complicated. And I had to deal with this like when I was interning in ministry. A kid in the youth group like came to the youth minister, and I don't know how that dude kept a straight face because the mom was like, "My son just won't quit playing games," and the youth minister was like, "Well, have you tried like taking the console away?" And she goes, "Well, he throws a tantrum," and I'm like, "And let him cry, whatever."
He might not like me when he grows up.
Gosh, I can't relate. Like, be a parent. That's how I feel about this. Just mom and dad, be parents.
Yeah. I think there is something to be said about the awareness of it, of what these gaming companies are trying to do. That, look, in a perfect magical world, all corporations would tell us exactly what they're attempting to do to us with all of the things that they put out. But in reality, none of them do. And everything we interact with has some sort of adverse effect on us, you know? Because all of these same arguments can be made about social media, about binge watching television, like all of these same things. So, but there is something to be said about like, how can we better educate other parents? Like Larry on the nightly rundown, I was talking about how you do those classes for your parents at your church where you're like, let me explain to you what Snapchat is, what, you know, and my boomer brain just stopped it at that. That's the only app that I know of.
Facebook, you got
you know, like you do a good job as a youth minister, but now doubling as a parent.
But almost no parents show up to those things.
Exactly. Like, and I think that's the point, is there are resources for you to educate yourself about the things that you place in your kids' hands, who they are coming to you asking if you can spend money on them, on it for, like, you need to take the time to look into those things and understand what's being done there. Like, why do you need $20 from me to buy what? A skin in a game that just makes your character look different? Like,
hell no.
Do you want to be grounded for a month? So yeah, like, I'm with you. It's a and your point about the lawyer thing is just fantastic. Fan-fucking-tastic. Like, if you've got the time, energy, resources, and means to hire a lawyer, just parent your damn kid and you're not going to get here. Like, oh, man.
Or if you've got that money to waste, like, hire a nanny who will parent your kid for you if you don't want to do it.
Yeah. And it's and this is something that is so much easier because there's something physical you can take away. Like, take away the power cord. There are tons of parental settings on the consoles, on your internet router that you can set. There is so much that you can do. Like, there are sleep timers now on routers that you can set. Like, hey, router turns off at 10:30 at night. Like,
parents won't learn this stuff though. It drives me crazy. Like, every time I do one of those classes, it never fails. Within 4 to 6 weeks of one of those classes, I will have a parent come to me and be like, hey, my kid wants to install this, or they installed this and they did this terrible thing, and like, do you know anything about this? And it just takes everything in me not to be like, yeah, I invited you directly to this thing 6 weeks ago where you could have learned all about this in a concise fashion.
My kid's carrying around this tiny rectangle with a screen on it. I have no clue what it is.
Oh, that's a Game Boy Color.
And I'm sure that every parent, I'm sure that everybody grows up and says, I don't want to be that person who's just blissfully unaware of these things. But I don't know. I don't know how you get to this point of ignorance, but maybe it's because we grew up in the information age.
Well, it's also, I think it's a lot easier to point to the game and say it's the game's fault than to point at yourself and admit to the fact that you've kind of been doing a shitty job as a parent.
Yeah.
It's much easier to point at the clown movie and say this is the reason that people are the way they are than to reckon with our actions as society. This is what I mean, and it's much easier to point at a game because this is, especially with a certain generation of parents, there's a preconception around what games are, something that takes over all your kids' time. Meanwhile, the parent is binge watching 12 episodes of Stranger Things and spending 12 hours in front of the TV. So there's hypocrisy on every level of it.
Yeah.
But I think it goes from a conversation around be a better parent to something a lot broader when you start thinking about the fact that, as you said, Luke, there is a designation now that takes effect, granted in 2022, but there's a designation by the World Health Organization around a gaming disorder. There are clinics popping up around gaming addiction. These are real world policies and institutions that are gathering around something that, I will say, I think there are people out there who probably are addicted to it, just as, and you can treat it in certain ways. And I think it's important to be able to address the people that really truly are addicted to technology and addicted to gaming. It's something that I think is easy to extract. It can actually pose potential harms to the person and their family and have impacts on their life. But just like anything, as soon as you put a name to it and call attention to it, there is a threat of overdiagnosing.
Yes.
And how that can impact a lot of kids just trying to have a good time. Like I spent an obscene amount of time playing games as a kid. My parents didn't think I was addicted, granted, because there probably wasn't a word for it back then. But if there is a designation by an organization like the World Health Organization, parents can start to think about it differently. And especially if these are the only stories they see in the news, these are the only stories my girlfriend sees in the news around games, it can start to potentially have actual impacts outside of the gaming industry. So I do kind of want to talk about that, because I think it's significant that there are actual policies being put in place to address these things.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen something similar happen with attention deficit disorder as well.
Yes,
like, my
exactly.
wife's in education, and there's been years where she's like, I've got 22 kids in my class and 20 of them are on ADD medicine. Like,
yeah.
And it's just because we take a symptom and call it a disorder, and while that disorder is very real for some individuals, it is definitely overdiagnosed, overmedicated, because it's a much easier answer than you don't have a structured home and discipline your kid, and so it will be a cop out of, and it's going to get even worse as, like, I just watched Super and Sinatra, two of the guys that play for the Shock. They went on Jimmy Kimmel. I'm sorry, Jimmy Fallon, talking about their championship, and which was a cool interview. You should go watch it. Fallon seemed like legitimately interested in it. Like, it wasn't one of those. It wasn't one of those. Oh man, you still live in your mom's basement interviews. But he was like, how long do you say you play a day? And Sinatra was like, we practice for about 8 hours, and then I'll play individually for another 3 or 4, so probably like 12 hours a day. And the more we get, the more attention gets put on pro gamers, and the more they talk about the grinding that they do, the more we're going to see kids say, oh man, if I want to be a pro Fortnite player or a pro Overwatch player, I'm going to have to play 12 hours a day, and fuck you, mom, I'm not going to school. I'm 10 years old and I do what I want, and so as that grows and those aspirations grow, we're going to see more and more kids that get addicted, when in reality it's just tell your kid, no, you are going to go to school, and we're going to let you play an hour a night, and that's what you get.
I would never say to my brother, you're addicted to basketball, despite the fact that he spends, during the summers especially, like at least 8 to 12 hours on the court or in the gym doing something related to basketball. And this was before he had a scholarship with a college team. There's just there is a cultural association around games in particular, and there's a psychological aspect to it too, but there's a cultural association around games that has this stranglehold on parents.
Well, because basketball is deemed good for you, because you don't see the same thing happening with reading either. Like, oh, this person's addicted to reading, when you may have a kid who's locked in their room all the time with a book under their blanket. You know,
Yeah. I was that kid.
And, I've made the point before, but fishing, hunting, like those are other hobbies that you can spend hours upon hours on, and it's not like if I was out in the woods all the time hunting, I wouldn't have like male relatives like, oh, you're not much of a man out there hunting all the time. But if my hobby's gaming, well, I'm some man child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think this is a very interesting topic to me, and something that I think will be even more fascinating going forward once that designation takes hold, and once I will be especially interested to see how many of these clinics end up popping up around the world, and the U.S. in particular, and how they actually go about addressing something like this. Because I think there are people who are addicted to technology and are addicted to this and do need help. It impacts them and their families. So I think being able to address that in the best way possible is a great thing. But I also think I probably would have been diagnosed with this if my parents had known about it when I was a kid.
Well, and I think that the thing that was interesting about the National Health, what's the NHS? National Health System.
Yeah, the National Health Service.
Yeah, National Health Service. The thing that was interesting was the age range for it, and I'm gonna pull it up. 13 to 25. So I think like when gaming addiction reaches a point where it's like diagnosable and needs to be treated, I think you're generally going to see that mostly in adults who don't have people in their lives who are adding structure. Like they set their own schedule. I think about guys I went to college with who literally flunked out of school because of WoW. Like did not show up to class because they were playing World of Warcraft. I just find it a lot harder to make a medical diagnosis of a 14-year-old for gaming addiction when they should be in a place where there's structure around them that can place hard limits on it.
If they're in a place with enough structure to take them to a clinic, then they're in a place with enough structure to say, honey, if you don't turn it off, I'm turning it off for you. And if it's a repeated problem, I'll get rid of it.
Yeah.
So like, and I guess circling back to an earlier point, there is a point where it's a problem. But like you're saying, Luke, it's when they are an adult and it is interfering with their capacity to create structure. But if they're in a situation where someone else is creating it for them, then look, the kid's not the one with the problem, my dude.
It's true. As you get older, there would hopefully be systems in place to respond to someone who's clearly in need, just like there are systems in place, unfortunately, too little in this country to respond to those who are suffering from mental illness or other forms of addiction as they get older and they don't have that safety net to fall back on of the family. They're out on their own. Go ahead. No, please.
I was also going to say, if your argument is going to also be it's as addictive as cocaine or tobacco, if you brought a kid in and said, hey, doc, my kid is addicted to cocaine, the doctor's going to ask, where the fuck did he get cocaine from? And I think that a similar question needs to apply here of like, hey, doc, my kid's addicted to games. He plays 8 hours a day. Well, why? Like, why does he play for 8 hours a day? So,
well, if I take the coke away from him, he just gets so upset.
He's so mad at me. And there's a legitimate reason to take it, like that taking those things away would need to be done under care because of withdrawals and other things that happen from like a physical standpoint. And I don't know if those things happen when you take video games away.
Well, you don't know.
But yeah, the story's just wild to me, man.
It is.
I'm sorry I soapboxed on it so much, Cody.
No, it's fine. No, I appreciate it. You bring a perspective that I really wanted, because ultimately the blame and the accountability lies at the feet of the people who are the adults who are living in the house with this person who's playing games.
And I get it. It is easier sometimes you just need a break, and it's easier to let the kid be entertained by the screen. But if you're going to parent your kid well, you got to be intentional, and that takes work.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see how Larry's 10 changes in 6 years when his oldest daughter is just playing Roblox for 28 hours.
Professional Roblox player.
Do you remember that guy, Tommy Jordan? It's probably been 8 to 10 years ago now. He made national news because his daughter did something, and he took her laptop out and shot it with a big revolver.
No, I don't remember that.
I don't know why I remember this guy's name. I don't remember anybody's name.
Yeah.
But I think he's from Texas, of course. But that'll be me. Like, I'll give them chances. If they can't get it under control, I'll just go destroy the thing.
just promise me if you do it, you're not going to post it to Facebook. That's so tacky. Like, oh man, my kid was playing.
Post it to Twitter.
Yeah, post it to Twitter.
Like a live stream on Twitch.
Yeah, there you go.
And I won't use a gun. Like, I'll burn that thing. It's going to be great.
Run over it with a lawnmower.
I've seen that on YouTube before.
Yeah, I've seen that as well.
But I can't break my lawnmower. I can't afford a new one. Oh, I'll sell it. What am I thinking? I'll sell their console.
Yeah, don't destroy that shit.
Why are we Tommy Jordan in this thing?
Sell it and put it in their college fund.
There you go.
All right.